Here's MSNBC's take on that bullshit speech that Obama just gave.
President Obama in Warsaw addressing the recent spate of killings by police of unarmed black men. The cases in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Minnesota really rocking the country, taking over social media. The president directly addressing them, saying people of goodwill must agree that we can do better, that the country must do better. He cited several statistics that show that African Americans are more vulnerable to arrest, more prone to be pulled over, subject to greater penalties in the criminal justice system. And he said that while there is, in a lot of cases, bipartisan agreement that this must change, he said change has been too slow. Good evening, I'm Joy Reid here at MSNBC headquarters in New York. I'm joined by Reverend Al Sharpton, who's here on set with me, Eugene Robinson, who's also with me. We were listening to the president together. And Reverend Sharpton, here we are again. Here we are again in another case of black men who were killed. These two back-to-back, the Philando Castile case coming just as the Alton Sterling case was also really sort of rocking, I think, people's emotions, because both of them, so much of that captured on cell phone video. The president said change has been too slow, but is there any momentum to go beyond the outrage and the rage people feel, but actually get something done?
The momentum will be determined by how much we sustain what we're doing now. I think that when the president was speaking, I thought about how 16 months ago we met with the president. Many of us from the civil rights organizations, activist community, he folded at that point his commission to deal with these things, and they made recommendations. And we continued having marches, vigils, but slowly the media goes elsewhere and politicians go elsewhere. And what I hope, and I clearly got that message from the president, is that we don't see this happen again. I'm on my way to Baton Rouge. The ministers and some of the local people have asked me to come. I'm on my way to Baton Rouge, and I've been in touch with one of the family members in St. Paul. And the issue for me that frightens me is next week is the Republican convention, and after that, the Democratic. Are we going to forget this the end of next week? Many of us have been fighting this all of our lives. We've seen steps forward, then 2 steps backward. I think we need to be determined, and this president said it tonight, and he set the tone with his commission that we need to get this done now. There's a bipartisan crime bill now. I mean, not crime bill, but criminal reform bill.
Sure.
That can be passed now. It's an election year. Make this an election issue so we come out of all of this with some new legislation that is more permanent than the news cycle or the social media cycle.
Yeah, and Eugene Robinson, you know, we've seen a lot of talk about bipartisanship on this issue. Senators Rand Paul and Cory Booker making a big deal about agreeing on some criminal justice reforms. The commission that Reverend Al Sharpton talked about that was convened by the administration. But in a day when we've seen hours and hours and hours of hearings grilling the FBI director, Director Comey, who himself has made a lot of pronouncements, really sort of revolutionary for an FBI director on the issues of race and policing. Do we see, will we see, could we look forward to maybe some congressional hearings on this subject that has so roiled the country really for decades and decades, but so much in the last several years?
We will see. I mean, and I don't know, and I'm just going to be frank here. It's difficult to be overly optimistic at this point because we have been through this. How many times have we been through this? You know, there's an essential issue at the center of all of these incidents, which is the utter devaluation of black lives. And, you know, the president went into a riff about Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, but black lives are more imperiled at this point. But there is a way in which black lives, especially the lives of young black men, are devalued in this country. In a chronic way that has been happening since before the birth of the republic. It's been there, and we have not solved that. And the president, I thought today, was speaking more to white America than to black America or.
Exactly. He was talking to
making a case that this is something that white Americans too.
He was talking to white America. He wasn't talking to black America. He gave us nothing.
Should care about. Yet what we have not had in recent years is the kind of sustained focus that Reverend Sharpman was talking about that it takes to get anything really done, to really move the needle. And we haven't had that. The Washington Post keeps a database of police shootings. Police shootings this year are up from last year. So, and then we'll have to look at the data to see the racial makeup there. But again, we don't have the sustained focus.
And we have the statistics, Rev. You heard the president cite the statistics that by now folks in the activist community as well as journalists know so well. 30% more likely to be pulled over, 3 times more likely to be searched, twice as likely to be shot by police. We know the statistics. It's not that more study is needed, it's action.
The hope that I have, because we've known these statistics for a while. In the 90s, when we started these no justice, no peace movements and Black Lives Matter now with the hashtag and all, we knew the statistics. The difference now is the video. And I'm hoping because the American public, white American public, can see these things. I have people stop me in airports and on the street saying, I thought you were making this stuff up. I don't know, I agree with you, but I'm looking at it now. I think that if we can capture the reality, that you can no longer be in denial when you see that tape from St. Paul and in the same week see it from Baton Rouge, that people can say, yes, I want to see change and make this an election year, because a lot of what I've been saying to young people in National Action Network and other groups is this is the year to say we're going to vote based on A, B, C, D, and one of those has to be around this kind of reform, not dropping out, but dropping in the system and making it work. Otherwise, you're only surrendering again to a moment that will pass, and they will say, well, we don't have to worry about that until there's a shooting again. We've got to stop being episodical. We've got to make real change.
And I want to bring in Paul Butler. He's a former federal prosecutor. And on this question of change and what could actually make a difference, Paul, you see in the case of the Philando Castile shooting, somebody who had a legal right to carry in a state that allows it. He's attempting to show the police officer his identification, but he had a perfectly legal right to have a gun. It reminds me, if you go back to the case of Tamir Rice and John Crawford III, who were shot for allegedly having a gun in an open carry state where in theory you're allowed to have a gun. So I think for a lot of African Americans, they sort of ask, well, where can you go? What can you do? You're obeying the laws. You're a lawful gun owner. You're still at risk of death. Is there any answer that the legal system can provide? Will there, in your view, be any sanction against these police officers who in both of these cases did not appear to be under any threat from the men that they killed?
I think there has to be joy, but I also think we have to move the conversation beyond bad apple cops and look at the whole culture of policing. The president said that the overwhelming majority of police officers are doing their job well. Frankly, that's not the experience of African Americans and Latinos. And if that were true, we wouldn't have all of these racial disparities. So the president another time has talked about the need to go from police officers having this mentality of warriors in communities of color to guardians. And what that means practically on the ground is that they get better training. Again, part of what we saw this week is just atrocious policing. If you think that someone has a gun, the first thing you learn in police academy is you don't roll up on that person and expose yourself to gunfire and then use that as an excuse to gun them down. You have to protect yourself. You have to conceal yourself. So some of this is just poor training. You know, there are 18,000 police departments in the United States. The Obama administration has been proactive, but it's done investigations of fewer than 50. The Obama administration has also been very creative about using its executive power to make the states do things they don't want to do. I think now is the time for that kind of visionary leadership with regards to race and policing.
Paul, go on, Reverend Charles.
But let me say this. I agree in principle with Paul is saying, but even before you get to training and culture, the thing that I think would freeze this to where we can start moving toward that is we need to see penalties for bad cops. In the late 90s, when we had the Abner Louima case in New York, where a young man was raped and sodomized by a police officer in a police station, we fought, we marched, it got into federal jurisdiction. Those policemen went to jail, and we saw a chilling effect on a lot of police thinking before they made moves. And I think that if we start seeing police having to be subjected to abiding by the law or paying a penalty for it, it would help us get into a training and cultural mode. But right now, they feel, why do I have to do anything? Because nothing's going to happen to me. Because when is the last time something happened? When we made it happen years ago. And I think that's what we've got to do. When police start understanding, just like bad elements in our community understand, that you'll pay for the crime, then I think you'll have a lot of the culture and the training in a different climate.
Because Paul Butler, and just to amplify what Rev was saying, because you look at these incidents, if you just look at the two incidents you have in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the store owner who was friendly with Alton Sterling, who knew him, said that then police attempted to take the surveillance video from his store. That's not a move that you would say in training has anything to do with trying to help the man on the ground. There's no attempt to render aid. You go to the Philando Castile case in Minnesota. There's no attempt to render aid. You see the officer really seeming to be himself in fear of somebody who had already been shot, not attempting to render aid. There does seem to be a culture of attempting to get together and make sure that the officer is legally protected and that happens, but that you're not seeing, absent any kind of a prosecution or fear of prosecution. How would training change anything?
So part of the training is about the appropriate use of force, including deadly force. But part of it is about bias. The governor of Minnesota said today, correctly I think, that if the suspect in that case were white, he would still be alive. So a lot of police officers have these prejudice against African-American men. They are afraid of us. And even the ones of goodwill have this implicit, unconscious bias. The good news there is that there are things that we can do about that. We can train them about their bias. Attorney General Lynch has required that kind of training for every federal law enforcement officer. So again, what I'd like to see President Obama do is to use the power of his executive office to require local police departments to undergo the same kind of training that he thinks our federal officers need.
And I want to bring Eugene Robinson back in quickly before we go to a couple of our reporters here, because Eugene, I think when a lot of people who've been sort of living these events through social media and looking at the pain of these family members who are losing loved ones are very skeptical of the idea that you can train people not to be afraid of black people. I mean, let's just be honest, that you can't train someone out of a fear of another person. And so, you know, I think a lot of people are really listening more to what Urban Sharpton is saying, which there has to be some sort of legal penalties and sanctions. In the Washington Post count of the number of incidents that have taken place, how many times are you finding that there's actually some legal sanction to the behavior of the police officer when they go outside their training or outside of the rules of the way they're supposed to use force?
Well, you know, Joy, I actually think, though, that this is almost the hardest piece of this whole puzzle to solve, is to getting convictions, because, in fact, police officers do realize that there could be prosecutions, and that's why they try to get their story straight and get the surveillance video and figure out who had a camera, a phone cam, and everything, because they're well aware of it. They know the legal justice system. The convictions are very difficult to get in these cases because we give police officers so much latitude, so much permission to use deadly force explicitly, and so the cases are always about, you know, sort of slicing very thinly between what's acceptable and what's not. I actually agree with Paul Butler that there has to be a shift of consciousness, and maybe that comes through training. If we could get convictions, that would perhaps shift consciousness, but there has to be a different mindset. Police can't go into communities as an army of occupation. They can't see the people they're policing as you know, as all potential criminals who to be subdued. And in fact, obviously not all police think that, but clearly enough do that we keep having these incidents.
Yeah, indeed. Let's bring in Blake McCoy, MSNBC reporter. He's in St. Paul, and let's get the latest on the reaction to the shooting there. Blake, how was the community reacting today to the Philando Castile killing?
Good evening, Joy. People here are angry, they're frustrated, they're sad. It's a huge mix of emotions, but unfortunately this community has been here before. The name Jamar Clark might ring a bell. He was a young black man shot and killed last fall. Charges were ultimately not recommended for the officers in that case. There was a lot of frustration there, and as one person said, here we are again. They said they've been on the steps of the governor's mansion here in St. Paul before, demanding change, and they're frustrated because it just hasn't come. This is the governor's mansion here in St. Paul. You can see a lull in the crowd right now. That's because many of the demonstrators have moved up to an elementary school about 6 blocks away where Philando Castile worked. He managed the cafeteria up there, and hundreds have gathered at that location, parents, children, and other community members. They're being led by the fiance who took that video, who was sitting next to Castile in that car when he was shot. So she's leading marchers up there. She just spoke to the crowd, and they're going to head back down here where they plan to demonstrate through the night. It was a remarkable scene early here today. People came to the governor's mansion to get his attention. The governor and lieutenant governor actually came on this side of the fence and stood with demonstrators. Some of them were very angry, got right in the governor's face and said, you need to do something. We have been here before. Nothing's changed. You need to do something. He kept his calm. He listened. He expressed sympathies towards the family. And as you heard one of the commentators earlier say, that's when he said, had this been a white man, it would not have ended this way. So the governor understands there is a problem that needs to be addressed. The problem is it's a cultural problem. How do you change the culture? And even the demonstrators here acknowledged to me that that's a very difficult thing to change, and it's not going to change overnight. You can't just change it through laws. Joy.
Yeah, indeed. Blake McCoy, thank you very much for us in St. Paul. Really appreciate it. I want to also thank Reverend Al Sharpton and Eugene Robinson, as well as Paul Butler. And when we come back, it's been a very big day in politics with FBI Director.
All right, so that's their take on the Obama speech, and basically I think they agree with me when I call bullshit.